courtroom felt cold and imposing to young Alara. She stood beside her client, Mrs. Davis, a small, frail woman with worried eyes. Across from them sat Mr. Thorne, a large man with a confident smirk. He was powerful in the city, with a lot of money and important friends. Alara was a new lawyer, full of passion but lacking experience. This case, about Mrs. Davis being unfairly evicted from her home, was her first big one. She had prepared for weeks, her small apartment filled with stacks of papers and highlighted notes. She believed in justice, in the power of the law to protect the weak. Mr. Thorne had a team of expensive lawyers, all dressed in sharp suits. They looked at Alara with barely hidden amusement. Thorne himself often interrupted her, his voice loud and booming in the quiet courtroom. He spoke over her objections, twisted her words, and even made jokes at her expense. The judge, a tired-looking man, did little to stop him. Alara felt her cheeks burning with humiliation. She tried to stay calm, to focus on the facts, but Thorne's words were like little stabs, making her doubt herself. He questioned her knowledge, implying she was too young and inexperienced to understand the complexities of the case. He made personal remarks, commenting on her appearance and her nervous demeanor. The jury, a group of strangers, watched with varying degrees of interest, some even chuckling at Thorne's cutting remarks. Alara felt her voice tremble as she tried to present her arguments. Mrs. Davis sat beside her, her hope slowly fading with each condescending word from Mr. Thorne. There was one moment Alara would never forget. She was trying to present a crucial piece of evidence, a letter that proved Mrs. Davis had been a good tenant for years. Thorne's lawyer objected, and Thorne leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile on his face. "Really, Miss Alara," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "are you sure you even know what that piece of paper says? Perhaps you should stick to simpler things, like delivering coffee." The courtroom erupted in quiet laughter. Alara's face flushed crimson. She felt small and insignificant, like a child playing at being a lawyer. Despite her best efforts, despite the truth being on Mrs. Davis's side, they lost the case. The judge ruled in favor of Mr. Thorne. Mrs. Davis's shoulders slumped in defeat, tears welling in her eyes. Alara felt a crushing weight of failure. She had let her client down. She had been outmaneuvered and humiliated by a man who seemed to believe he was above the law. As Mr. Thorne and his team left the courtroom, Thorne caught Alara's eye. He gave her a dismissive nod, a look that said she was nothing, that her efforts were meaningless. In that moment, something inside Alara hardened. The humiliation was a deep wound, but it also sparked a quiet, fierce determination. She would not forget this day. She would not forget Mr. Thorne, and one day, she vowed silently, things would be different. Years passed. The sting of that courtroom defeat never fully faded for Alara, but it transformed into a quiet, burning fuel. She threw herself into her work with a relentless intensity. She took any case she could, big or small, learning the intricacies of the law, the strategies of seasoned lawyers, and the nuances of courtroom dynamics. Her small apartment, once filled with her own case files, became a library of legal knowledge. She read every judgment, every statute, every legal commentary she could find. She deliberately sought out challenging cases, the ones other lawyers avoided. She wanted to test herself, to build her skills, to become the formidable lawyer she knew she could be. Slowly, steadily, her reputation began to grow. People started to notice her sharp intellect, her meticulous preparation, and her unwavering dedication to her clients. She argued her cases with a quiet confidence that belied her earlier nervousness. She learned to anticipate her opponent's moves, to counter their arguments with precision, and to present her own cases with compelling clarity. She moved to a bigger firm, one with more resources and more complex cases. Her colleagues respected her work ethic and her growing success. Clients sought her out, drawn by her reputation for diligence and her genuine empathy. She still remembered Mrs. Davis, and that memory fueled her commitment to fighting for the underdog, for those who were vulnerable and easily dismissed. Mr. Thorne, in the meantime, continued to build his empire. His businesses expanded, his influence grew, and he seemed untouchable. He moved in circles of power, his name often in the news for his latest acquisition or his philanthropic endeavors. He likely never gave a second thought to the young, inexperienced lawyer he had so easily dismissed years ago. Why would he? He was at the top, and she was a fleeting memory of a minor legal skirmish. But Alara remembered. She followed his career in the news, not with bitterness, but with a detached interest. She noted his successes, but also the whispers of less savory dealings, the rumors of sharp practices and a disregard for those beneath him. She filed these observations away, not knowing why, but with the sense that the world had a way of circling back. One day, a senior partner at her firm called her into his office. He had a new case, a complex commercial litigation involving a powerful corporation accused of fraud. The details were intricate, the stakes were high, and the opposing counsel was known for their aggressive tactics. He believed Alara was the right person for the job. As he mentioned the name of the corporation and its CEO, a familiar chill ran down Alara's spine. The CEO's name was Richard Thorne. A decade had passed, but the name, the weight of it, was instantly recognizable. A quiet intensity settled in her eyes. The years of hard work, the relentless pursuit of knowledge, the burning memory of humiliation, it all coalesced in that moment. The path she had unknowingly been walking had just led her back to him. The news of Alara's firm taking on the case against his company reached Richard Thorne as a minor annoyance. A fly buzzing in his well-ordered world, he was used to legal challenges. His success had inevitably attracted them. He had a stable of expensive lawyers who usually made such nuisances disappear quickly. He glanced at the list of the opposing legal team, a string of unfamiliar names. One name, however, caught his eye. Alara Vance. The name sparked a faint, almost forgotten memory, a flicker of a young, flustered lawyer from years ago. He chuckled to himself. Vance, probably a common name. Couldn't be her. He dismissed it, focusing on more pressing matters. A lucrative new business deal, a charity gala he was hosting, the upcoming golf tournament at his exclusive club. His life was a carefully constructed edifice of wealth and influence, and he rarely looked back at the small people he had stepped over on his way to the top. Meanwhile, Alara dove into the details of the case against Thorne Industries with a focused intensity. The allegations of fraud were complex, involving layers of shell corporations and manipulated financial records. It was a daunting task, but Alara was methodical. She and her team worked tirelessly, poring over documents, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the intricate puzzle of Thorne's alleged deceit. As she delved deeper, a clearer picture of Richard Thorne began to emerge. A man who operated with ruthless efficiency and a profound sense of entitlement. He seemed to believe the rules didn't apply to him, that his wealth and power shielded him from accountability. This resonated with Elara's memory of his arrogance in court years ago. The dismissive smirk, the condescending tone, it all pointed to a man who saw himself as superior. The preliminary hearings began, and Elara finally came face to face with Richard Thorne again. He looked older, his hair slightly grayer, but the confident swagger was still there. He surveyed the opposing counsel with a detached air, his eyes briefly meeting Elara's without any sign of recognition. For Elara, however, the recognition was immediate and visceral. The years melted away, and she was once again that young, humiliated lawyer in the cold courtroom. But this time, she was different. The nervousness was gone, replaced by a quiet steel. Her arguments were sharp, her questions precise. She presented the initial findings of her team with a calm authority that commanded attention. Thorne, initially dismissive, began to pay closer attention. There was something in her demeanor, a certain unwavering focus, that was unsettling. During a recess, Thorne's lead counsel approached Elara, attempting to intimidate her with veiled threats and offers of a quick settlement. Elara met his gaze unflinchingly. "My client seeks justice, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice calm but firm, "and that is what we intend to pursue." Back in court, as Elara presented more compelling evidence, a flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, perhaps a dawning unease, crossed Richard Thorne's face. He still didn't seem to recognize her, not truly. But there was a sense that he understood this was not going to be as easy as he had initially thought. The fly was not just buzzing, it was starting to sting. The case against Richard Thorne and his company moved forward, each hearing revealing more layers of alleged deception. Elara and her team meticulously presented their evidence. Complex financial transactions, emails that hinted at conspiracy, and the testimonies of former employees who spoke of a culture of dishonesty orchestrated from the top. With each piece of evidence laid bare, the confident facade that Thorne usually projected began to show cracks. He started attending the hearings more regularly, his initial air of bored superiority replaced by a growing agitation. He would often confer with his lawyers, his face tight with frustration. He would glare at Elara as she presented her arguments, a flicker of something akin to anger in his eyes. Still, there was no sign of recognition, no hint that he connected. This composed, formidable lawyer with the nervous young woman he had once dismissed. Elara, on her part, maintained a professional detachment. She focused solely on the facts of the case, her personal history with Thorne a tightly locked box within her. Yet every time she looked at him, every time she heard his dismissive tone when he spoke to his own lawyers, the memory of his humiliation in the courtroom years ago resurfaced, a quiet reminder of what had fueled her journey. The media began to take notice of the case. The allegations against a prominent businessman like Richard Thorne were newsworthy, and Elara's sharp questioning and the compelling evidence her team presented made for a captivating narrative. Thorne, used to positive press and admiration, found himself under increasing scrutiny. His carefully crafted image began to tarnish one afternoon. During a particularly intense cross-examination of one of Thorne's key witnesses by Elara, something shifted. Elara presented an old document, a contract with a familiar letterhead from her very first case. As she questioned the witness about its implications, she glanced at Thorne. For the first time, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. It was fleeting, a momentary widening of his eyes, a slight furrowing of his brow, but it was there, later that day, after the hearing adjourned. Thorne's lead counsel requested a private meeting with Elara. He offered a substantial settlement, far more than they had previously proposed. "Mr. Thorne wants to put this behind him, Miss Vance," the lawyer said, his tone more respectful than before. "He believes a settlement would be in everyone's best interest." Alara listened calmly. "My client is not interested in a settlement at this time, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, her voice steady. "We believe that justice needs to be served." As she walked away, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that Thorne had finally remembered her. The dismissal in his eyes had been replaced by something else, perhaps concern, perhaps even a hint of fear. The power dynamics had shifted dramatically. The man who had once made her feel insignificant was now facing the very real possibility of his empire crumbling under her scrutiny. The years of quiet determination were beginning to bear fruit. Weeks turned into months, and the case against Richard Thorne became a high-profile spectacle. The courtroom was often packed with reporters and onlookers, all eager to witness the unfolding drama. Judge Thompson, a stern but fair man, presided over the proceedings, maintaining order amidst the mounting tension. Alara continued to present her case with unwavering focus, each piece of evidence meticulously laid out, each witness carefully questioned. Richard Thorne's initial arrogance had completely evaporated. Replaced by a palpable anxiety, he would often fidget in his seat, his gaze fixed on Alara as she spoke. He now knew who she was. There were hushed conversations with his lawyers, frantic phone calls made during breaks, and a visible strain on his face. The confident businessman, who had once seemed untouchable, was now clearly feeling the pressure. Alara could feel his gaze on her, a mixture of apprehension and perhaps a flicker of something else, a dawning understanding of the consequences of his past actions. But she remained impassive, her focus solely on the legal proceedings. This was not about personal revenge, she told herself repeatedly. It was about justice for her client, for those who had been harmed by Thorne's alleged greed and deceit. However, the memory of his humiliation still lingered, a quiet undercurrent to her professional demeanor. There were moments when Thorne would try to interrupt, or his lawyers would employ the same dismissive tactics he had used years ago, that a sharp retort would rise within her, but she would suppress it, knowing that her strength lay in her composure and her adherence to the law. One afternoon, during a particularly damning testimony from a former executive at Thorne Industries, Richard Thorne finally addressed Alara directly. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice strained, "surely there must be a way to resolve this." Amicably, Alara met his gaze across the courtroom. Her expression was cool and professional. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice clear and steady, "the time for amicable resolution, if it ever existed, has long passed. We are here to seek accountability for the alleged actions of you and your company." The courtroom fell silent. Thorne's face flushed with anger and frustration. He realized that Alara was not going to back down. She was not the intimidated young lawyer he remembered. She was a force to be reckoned with, driven by a deep sense of justice and armed with years of hard-earned expertise. As the trial moved towards its conclusion, the evidence against Thorne and his company mounted. Alara's closing arguments were a masterful summation of the case, weaving together the complex financial details and the human cost of Thorne's alleged fraud. She spoke with a quiet passion, her words resonating with the jury and the spectators. Richard Thorne sat silently, his shoulders slumped, the weight of the accusations heavy upon him. He knew, with a growing certainty, that his carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. The jury deliberated for several days, the tension in the city palpable as people awaited their verdict. Richard Thorne remained a shadow of his former self, his usual confident swagger replaced by a nervous energy. He avoided eye contact with almost everyone, his gaze often fixed on some unseen point in the distance. Elara, despite the immense pressure of the trial's climax, maintained a calm exterior. Inside, however, a complex mix of emotions swirled. The satisfaction of seeing justice potentially served, the lingering memory of her past humiliation, and a quiet understanding of the human cost of the unfolding events. Finally, the day arrived when the jury reached a decision. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Richard Thorne sat stiffly beside his lawyers, his face pale. Elara stood with her team, her expression composed but her heart pounding softly in her chest. The foreperson of the jury, a middle-aged woman with a serious demeanor, read out the verdict. Count by count, the words echoed through the silent courtroom. Guilty, ... guilty, ... guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators. Richard Thorne's composure, finally, broke. His face crumpled, and he slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation crashing down upon him. Elara felt a wave of something wash over her. It wasn't elation, not exactly. It was more like a profound sense of closure, a quiet affirmation that the years of hard work and dedication had led to this moment. She glanced at Thorne, a flicker of something akin to pity crossing her features before she quickly composed herself. Justice had been served. The sentencing hearing was scheduled. For a few weeks later, the prosecution, led by Elara, presented a compelling case for a significant punishment, highlighting the extent of Thorne's fraud and the damage it had caused to countless individuals. Thorne's lawyers pleaded for leniency, painting a picture of a broken man who had already lost everything. When Judge Thompson delivered the sentence, his voice was firm and resolute. He spoke of the importance of accountability, of the need to deter others from similar acts of greed and deception. He handed down a significant prison sentence, along with hefty fines and the forfeiture of assets. As the bailiffs led a defeated Richard Thorne out of the courtroom, his eyes briefly met Elara's. For the first time, she saw not arrogance or dismissal, but a raw, naked despair. In that moment, the weight of her role in his downfall truly hit her. She had not sought revenge, but her pursuit of justice had undeniably led to his ruin. Later that day, as Elara stood in her quiet office, the city lights twinkling outside her window, she reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this point. The humiliation in that courtroom years ago had been a crucible, forging her into the lawyer and the person she had become. She had not become the judge who ruined him, but she had been the lawyer who brought him to justice. And in that, she found a quiet, hard-earned sense of peace. Years passed after Richard Thorne's sentencing. Elara continued her work as a respected lawyer, taking on complex and challenging cases. She had built a reputation not only for her sharp legal mind, but also for her unwavering integrity. The memory of the Thorne case remained with her, a constant reminder of the power of the law and the importance of holding even the most powerful accountable. She never sought out cases involving Thorne or his remaining associates. Her pursuit had been about justice for the victims of his fraud, not about a personal vendetta. However, the legal world was interconnected, and occasionally, his name would surface in news reports or in the context of other legal proceedings, related to the fallout from his crimes. Each time, Elara would acknowledge it with a quiet nod, a reminder of a chapter closed. One day, a new case landed on her desk. It involved a young entrepreneur who claimed he had been unfairly targeted. and financially ruined by a powerful business conglomerate. As Alara read through the details, the tactics employed by the conglomerate bore an unsettling similarity to those she had encountered in the Thorn case. The same arrogance, the same disregard for the smaller players, the same ruthless efficiency. As she delved deeper into the evidence, Alara discovered that one of the key figures in the conglomerate's leadership was none other than Thorn's son, Daniel. Daniel Thorn had taken over the remnants of his father's business empire, seemingly determined to rebuild it, perhaps even in his father's image. Alara felt a familiar resolve hardening within her. This wasn't about the past. It was about preventing history from repeating itself. She took on the case, knowing that it would likely be a difficult and emotionally charged battle. It wasn't just about another powerful entity trying to crush someone smaller. It was a confrontation with the legacy of the man who had once humiliated her. The legal battle with Daniel Thorn's conglomerate was intense. He was a shrewd and determined opponent, having learned from his father's mistakes, yet still exhibiting a similar underlying arrogance. Alara found herself once again in a courtroom, facing the next generation of a family that believed itself to be above the rules. During a particularly tense cross-examination, Daniel Thorn, in a moment of frustration, made a veiled reference to his father's downfall, implying that Alara had been motivated by personal animosity. Alara met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Thorn," she said, her voice calm but firm, "my motivation has always been, and will always be, the pursuit of justice. Your father's actions had consequences, and so will yours if the evidence shows wrongdoing." The trial with Daniel Thorn's company reached a similar conclusion to his father's. The evidence of their unfair practices was compelling, and the jury found in favor of Ilaros's client. Another powerful entity was held accountable. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict, Alara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had not become a judge to ruin Richard Thorn, but her journey had ultimately led to his downfall. And now, years later, to holding his son accountable as well. The humiliation she had endured in that courtroom years ago had not defined her, it had fueled her. She had transformed that pain into a powerful force for justice, ensuring that the scales tipped, even against the most powerful. And in doing so, she had truly found her own form of vindication, not in ruin, but in the unwavering pursuit of what was right.